7 decades of discovery. Since 1930, Canadian Geographic has helped Canadians explore Canada. And now we've created Canada's new century wall map. Thanks to our 70th anniversary patrons, like Jeep, proud founding sponsor of the Trans-Canada Trail. Spectacular television, great magazines, and our fascinating website, Canadian Geographic. Now, more than ever, discover Canada with us.
For over 1 million years, great rivers of ice have surged from their Arctic birthplace to claw at the earth with massive, frozen talons. Thousands of meters deep, these rivers were created from simple roots. In times of relative cold, summer sun fails to melt winter's snow. Snow accumulates until its own great weight compresses the layers below, forming ice. Then gravity takes hold, and the river begins to flow. Canada is home to over 100,000 glaciers, the most glaciated terrain in the world. To journey to a glacier is to travel back in time, to a place where the story of the Ice Age is still being written. And like oracles, they trace subtle paths towards our future. Glaciers, massive, majestic, and mysterious, are one of the last unknown frontiers on Earth, inspiring a frozen quest to divine the secrets in the ice. Out here, mankind seems small, inconsequential, and nature too powerful to comprehend. "18,000 years ago, Canada was consumed by the Laurentide ice sheet, ice as high as the oceans are deep. It carved mountains, gouged out the Great Lakes, and scraped the prairies flat. 8,000 years later, the ice had retreated. Yet today, in the coldest recesses of Canada, the last ice age still exists. This is St. Elias, the way the world once was. Located in the southwest corner of the Yukon, St. Elias is the largest ice field in the world, outside the polar regions. Towering above it, Mount Logan, the largest mass of granite on Earth, bears silent witness to 1 million years of history. Biologist David Hick has come to Elias seeking the most sublime and delicate of mysteries. Here in this land of immense relief, a small, furry creature holds the key to life within the ice. The journey is a dangerous one. When ice flows, huge crevasses may open wide. Hick and his team must remain tethered and cautious in case the soft surface conceals a bottomless chasm beneath. These could be the first tracks ever laid in this place. Their destination is a small peak, jutting from the ice like an island in a frozen sea. Called Nunataks, an Inuit word meaning land attached, life exists here on a precarious perch. Plants and insects are blown in on the wind. Birds arrive, blown off course during migration. Once here, they may have no other option except to nourish this minute ecosystem with their bodies. Only one animal, the collared pika, has traveled across the ice with a purpose. It is this tiny mammal, one of nature's greatest survivalists, that draws David Hick to the ends of the earth. Living under 10 meters of snow for 10 months of the year, on grass stockpiled from an ecosystem the size of a blanket, during an ice age 120,000 years in the making, is the only life a pika knows.
My real interest in coming to these Nunataks and looking for pikas and for the other plants and animals is really a curiosity about the limits of life, just how far and how extreme and how remote can we find places where plants and animals seem to live. And here on this Nunatak, collared pikas and the plants, other plants and animals, they don't just live here, they thrive here.
A cousin of the rabbit, the pika lives 200 kilometers inside the ice field. The mystery is, how did they get here? Did they live on Nunataks before the last ice age cut them off from the rest of the world? Or did they migrate from the mainland, seeking safe haven? Ten years ago, there were no questions. No one knew life existed here, until David Hick discovered pika thriving on the Nunataks. Since then, he's spent every summer studying life as it was 20,000 years ago.
The evidence we have so far is that these pikas are able to disperse over very long distances. You can imagine a little rabbit the size of your fist hopping across 10 kilometers of ice and not only finding another place to live that has shelter and food, but also a mate.
A delicate, natural balance prevails in the St. Elias icefield. On a once frozen continent, the pika may be the only mammal to have survived the last ice age. And understanding this tiny, ancient survivalist might help us understand the modern mysteries of life as the planet heats up. The pika survived a cold world. The question is, can it survive a warming one? Those who pursue mysteries in the ice must brave some of the harshest weather the world has to offer.
Well, we've eaten the dogs.
The hot dogs had it.
Yes.
On Eclipse Dome, in the heart of the St. Elias Icefield, a team of researchers had been pinned in their tents for 5 days by a vicious storm. It is late August, summertime in most of Canada. The team from the Institute of Ocean Sciences in Victoria, British Columbia, has come a long way to Eclipse Dome to drill for deep and ultra-clean ice cores. They're searching for pollutants, man's footprint in a pristine world. The storm clears, nature rests, and it soon becomes apparent, as difficult as it may be, this is the best job in the world. As Mount Logan towers 6,000 meters above them, there's time for an open-air meal and the first look at the world in nearly a week. Invisible to the naked eye, the air mass is volatile here. Only 150 kilometers from the Pacific coast, Asian, European, and North American air masses collide directly over Eclipse Dome. Ice domes form at high altitude, in the open spaces between mountains, where perennial snow builds up over 1,000 centuries to dominate the landscape. Eclipse Dome is the perfect place to drill for evidence of man's industrial impact on the planet.
Ice is the one place where we've got a long-term chance to capture gases out of the atmosphere. They don't get captured in the ocean or ocean sediments. So you can get CO2, methane records, and things like that from a long way back. I mean, it's kind of neat to think that you can infer what the CO2 levels were in the atmosphere 30,000 years ago by looking at ice.
Like nothing else, glacial ice provides an indisputable portrait of the past. Today, it could provide a snapshot of the present, which we may not want to acknowledge.
Water here from electric drill operation.
Michael Jeremasov lowers the drill hundreds of meters down into the history of the world. Their search is for mercury, a natural but deadly toxin penetrating the Earth's water and food supplies in dangerous concentrations. But if they looked, Krakatoa, Hiroshima, Chernobyl, and Mount St. Helens could also be found here. The world's farthest reaches have always maintained a communication with this place.
Any contaminant that gets an opportunity to come here, and it gets its opportunity by drifting in air masses, will eventually leave its imprint on this site. In the springtime in the Arctic, there's a phenomenon called the Arctic haze, and that happens particularly on the Alaskan coast, and I'm sure this site would have an opportunity of sampling it from time to time. And where does Arctic haze come from? Basically, it's Eastern European air masses that move across the Arctic Ocean in a period measured in weeks.
We leave the motors off until we get very close to the bottom of the hole, and then we restart the drill motors and approach the bottom slowly.
The history of all human activity has been scribed in this ice, including the tale of the Industrial Revolution.
I am convinced that there would be a lead record in here from our use of lead, particularly in gasoline back in the 60s and 70s. In fact, they started using lead in gasoline in 1927, and that record shows up all over the place. We could look at sulfate. That's a product of human activities. There's probably a record in here of organochlorines. I'm sure that if we collected enough material and we went in large enough volumes and worked at it hard enough, we would find a DDT record in here, we would find a PCB record in here, we would find a toxaphene record in here, despite the fact that toxaphene has not been used anywhere near this place. And the list goes on.
Ice, drawn from the belly of the glacier, thousands of years old, and a record of all that has transpired. Understanding the impact of human activities on the planet is the ecological riddle of our age. But the biggest risk here is that MacDonald himself will contaminate the core. This is the glaciologist's treasure, a frozen time capsule, 200 centuries of the Earth's collective memory, embedded in ice. A world of terrible beauty and remorseless power. This is not a place man should come to make sense of his own folly. But the window on the world which glaciers opens is only now beginning to be understood. The irony of eclipse is this: industrialized man has polluted places he has never even been. The Rocky Mountains, Canada's most majestic range, is home to thousands of glaciers. This is Peyto, located on the southern edge of the Columbia Icefield, straddling the continental divide between Alberta and British Columbia. It is one of the most southerly glaciers in Canada. The mystery here is global warming. Glaciologist Michael Demuth and assistant Terry Beck seek to reveal the glacier's 20,000-year history and, through it, understand recent dramatic changes in global climate. In the world of glaciers, Peyto qualifies as small, but in the world of science, Peyto is huge, one of the longest studied bodies of ice in the world. We understand more about this glacier than almost any other.
Peyto Glacier is part of a network of glaciers in Canada and North America, and indeed globally, that are used to monitor climate change. And using that network under the Global Climate Observing System and the World Glacier Monitoring Service, we're able to assess not only site-specific variations in climate, but build more regional and global pictures of climate variability.
Glaciers have ebbed and flowed through these mountain valleys for almost 3 million years. But it's now possible that within the lifetime of our grandchildren, they may be gone forever. In the flat accumulation zone at the top of Peyto, where the glacier was born, Demuth begins to drill.
What we hope to accomplish over the next few days is to hand auger down through the fern up here in the accumulation area and determine over the past few years, perhaps as far back as 10 years, the accumulation rate at this site, how much snow arrived and what was left at the end of each year, and collect an ice core which would have a chronology sort of like tree rings, sort of like counting tree rings, where we would have annual interfaces and between which we could calculate how much moisture arrived at this site year after year after year.
Okay, easy, easy.
As we recover the cores out of the glacier, we'll be photographing them, looking at the stratigraphy, and trying to identify visually the annual layers.
Yep.
And this is simply accomplished by looking for dirty horizons, which normally are coincident with the late summer, start of winter time.
And there's 1998 summer surface where that dirt layer is.
The ice core opens a window to the past, and through it the Earth's climatic history is revealed. What Michael Demuth sees is a dramatic change in the local climate.
in the mid-70s, there was a shift in the North American circulation pattern that created less snow in general in the winter in western, southwestern Canada and northwestern USA. And this pattern of less snow in winter has led to some drastic changes in the glaciers here.
Further down Peyto, below its receding toe, geographer Scott Munro is also studying the cause and effect of the glacier's melting.
Overall, we're losing ice. In this area, we have ice volume losses in the order of maybe 50 to 70% over the last century.
Dramatic change over a short period of time requires answers, and the sooner the better. Munro's work focuses on glacier energetics, how much energy from the sun the ice is absorbing, how fast the ice is melting, and the rapid change of atmospheric conditions. The blue ice of Peyto signifies old ice, newly exposed and without a protective cover of fresh snow to shield it from the sun. The effect is cumulative and predictable. The smaller the glacier, the faster it will melt, and Peyto is melting rapidly.
We consider Peyto Glacier in the worldwide context. Is it unusual? Not at all. This is a retreating glacier. It's smaller than it was. We see the same picture in Europe, in Asia, large parts of South America, well, large parts, the Andes, southern South America. This is a pretty typical of what is going on worldwide.
The ice fields are emptying. Geographically, the phenomenon is widespread. Historically, it is without precedent. But the mystery persists. What part of the Earth's rapid warming is natural, and what part is man-made? So far, no one knows.
Well, to what degree should we duplicate this where one can really get a good picture of what's happening now to the glacier as compared to what has happened perhaps before humankind started influencing the Earth's climate.
I can calibrate that setup.
Alpine and mountain glaciers are losing mass at an accelerating rate. That's perhaps broadly consistent. We haven't confirmed this absolutely, but broadly consistent with what we might expect with an enhanced greenhouse effect.
The greenhouse effect. We all know about it, but should we fear it? Millions of years ago, the ice caps were temperate forests. In 1996, glaciers gained more mass than they lost. Perhaps man takes too much credit for his influence on the planet. Perhaps nature is the greatest mystery of all. Back in the St. Elias Mountains, in the southwestern corner of the Yukon, glaciologist Gary Clark enjoys his walk to work on the Trapridge Glacier. The ice here is unique and dangerous. It may appear static, but in reality, it is dynamic. Like a dormant volcano waiting to erupt, unknown forces and tensions churn invisibly beneath its surface. Trapridge is a surging glacier, capable of sliding hundreds of meters in a single season. The mystery is, how?
You think of the glacial time scale as being decades or centuries, and we have fantastic events that occur in this glacier in a matter of 2 minutes, transforming the glacier from one state to another.
Imagine a freight train with no brakes, 10 kilometers long and weighing billions of tons, rolling downhill completely out of control with no possible means of stopping it. That is a surging glacier. A massive cresting wave, a barely contained power, waiting until unpredictably it decides to move.
The last surge of this glacier was in 1945. What we're trying to do is instrument this glacier and observe it when it clicks on for the next surge. People are most fascinated by the surface of glaciers because that's what you get to stand on and photograph. For glaciologists, the really interesting stuff all occurs at the contact between the bottom ice and the bed beneath it, because that's where the processes that control fast flow are active.
Fast flow means fast movement. Gary Clark has been studying Trap Ridge for 30 years and knows more about glaciers than perhaps anyone else on the planet. Yet Clark has still not got to the bottom of the problem: how to predict the next surge.
This is our hot water drill. The water's just a little bit below the boiling temperature. It's coming out at 2,500 psi of pressure. Jets through the glacier, just melts its way down. We can get about 100 meters an hour with this. So it means we can get right through the ice in less than an hour. Our big approach to studying this glacier is to fill it with instruments. This is the most densely instrumented piece of ice in the world. We drill 60 holes in it every year. We put 200 sensors in or on the glacier and record their information year-round. We've been doing this with this level of intensity for now more than a decade.
They've reached bedrock and lower a pressure gauge down into the glacier's frozen belly. Gary Clark seeks answers to the most important questions of our time. Predicting surges has impact far beyond this landlocked glacial outpost.
The kinds of things that interest us are the subglacial water pressure, which tends to be very close to the flotation pressure. And this is, in fact, what gives rise to the possibility of fast flow. When the glacier is flowing fast, it's virtually afloat on its own water.
Meltwater, sinking through the ice, can be trapped between glacier and bedrock. If enough water collects and becomes pressurized, the glacier can lift itself up and hydroplane down the valley, in effect riding its own wave. Like Peyto, Trap Ridge is considered a small glacier. But when large glaciers move fast, as they have throughout history, the effects on the Earth's climate are immediate and immense.
The larger story is more relevant to the question of global climate. How do the large ice sheets behave? What physics dominates their flow, their expansion, their decay?
Over 75% of the world's population lives on or near ocean coastlines, exposed to any dramatic increase in sea levels. Continental ice sheets surged 6 times during the last ice age, sending fleets of icebergs the size of Manhattan into the sea. Ocean circulation patterns shut down. Temperatures rose 10 to 15 degrees almost overnight, and sea levels rose dramatically. The effect on the planet was nothing short of cataclysmic. the Earth's ice sheet surged or melted today, sea levels would rise over 70 meters, flooding inland by as much as 300 kilometers. How did ice sheets surge in the past? Will they again? And are human influences accelerating the possibility? These are perhaps the greatest and most important mysteries in the ice. In ways we can scarcely imagine, the world's great glaciers are central to our daily lives. When a tap is turned on in Canada, there's a good chance the water that pours out began its journey here, high in the Rocky Mountains. This is Snow Dome, the hydrologic apex of North America. From here, meltwater feeds 3 oceans, the Arctic, Pacific, even the Atlantic, 5,000 kilometers away. Melting ice, flowing down from Snow Dome, has provided the single most important condition of life for an entire continent. Water. It all begins with water. The change of state from solid to liquid is a moment of natural transformation. An elemental miracle. Only ice and water have shaped our Earth. Glaciers carved these valleys, slicing through rock with an inconceivable force. When they receded, great rivers replaced them, channeling torrents of melting ice down from the highlands and breathing life into the landscape. Along with deserts and sea floors, glaciers, like the ice age that spawned them, are one of the harshest environments on Earth, where life is a virtual impossibility. "20,000 years ago, this valley was filled to the brim with ice, as far as the eye could see. Mountains, thousands of meters in elevation, were mere nunataks, their peaks, like arcs drifting in a frozen wasteland, the only possible sanctuary. 10,000 years ago, this is what the world became. The glacier, long vanquished from this valley, had left behind the necessary ingredients for nature to thrive here. Sand flats on the river's edge provide rich sedge grasses for a hungry grizzly. On the edge of the former ice field, Dahl's sheep find forage on steep slopes. Life here is as awesome as the force that created it. In the Yukon's Ruby Range, glaciers disappeared 15,000 years ago, and the pika, the great Ice Age survivalist, watched them melt. The mystery here is life after ice, drawing biologist David Hick down from the ice fields of St. Elias. Glacial boulder fields shade the pika from the sun, perfectly adapted to Ice Age life. If their body temperature increases 1 degree, they die. Isolated for thousands of years, pika are the most inbred mammal on Earth, creating a new age problem for the world's smallest farmer. To survive the long Yukon winter, a winter that in the past had no end, pika harvest grass and flowers and ingeniously store them in rocky nooks. To the glaciologist, ice is a planetary barometer. To the biologist, so is the pika.
What we're doing here today are collecting soil samples as well as samples of some of the species of plants that we've been working on closely for the last 4 or 5 years. And what we've found is that they're able to compensate for the removal of leaves by the pikas during the growing season. And by that I mean that through being grazed, they extend their own growing season and produce more leaves or more stems. So there's a positive feedback between the vegetation and the foraging by the pikas.
By studying pika in opposing ecosystems, on the ice fields and in mountain valleys, David Hick attempts to understand the challenges of surviving in a changing, warming world.
The plants and animals that grow here are really a function of the past glacial history and the current climate. And the changes that might occur over the next decades of climate change are difficult to predict, but we can look at sites that, for example, here in the Front Ranges, and compare them to the Ruby Ranges, which have a slightly longer growing season, and perhaps predict what these changes might be over time. And one of the things we know about pikas is that they don't like high temperatures. Their thermal lethal limit is very close to their body temperature. Probably doesn't have very much snow cover. You can see it's not very large either. Yeah, again, this one's not active right now. They're reach a bit further back and get a bit more out of this, but all that looks pretty old. Well, that's last season's here. It's last season's, but a lot of this is just moss. So
80% of the Ruby Range pika colony died this year, a direct result of global warming. For the pika, adaptation to rapid change may prove impossible. The world is simply moving too fast, forcing one of the great mysteries of life in the ice fields to vanish before David Hick gets his answers. Athabasca Glacier, flowing out of the Great Columbia Icefield in the Canadian Rockies, is one of the few glaciers in Canada you can drive to. In summer, over 6,000 people come here every day. The power and mystery of glaciers arouses the imagination and, like a magnet, draws us to them. In deference to a force greater than ourselves, we seem humbled by the ice and fascinated by its sheer, silent presence. We are not alone. Throughout history, people have always been drawn to these places.
On August the 14th, 1999, 3 hunters were traveling on foot through a glacial area within the Tachincini-Alsac Park in the extreme northwest corner of British Columbia when they came across some remains and artifacts, a hat and a throwing spear.
A glacier had yielded its greatest secret, an ancient man encased in ice. It may be one of the most important archaeological discoveries in Canadian history. The man carried with him a trove of well-crafted belongings, a beautifully woven hat, a stout walking stick, a spear thrower, and a leather pouch containing edible leaves and fish. The hat may be the key to the man's identity. He lived and died about 600 years ago and was probably on a journey, either to hunt or to trade with peoples living on the glacier's other side when he disappeared. Glaciologist Eric Blake was a member of the team that excavated the site.
To hear that some remains had been found was amazing. I must say one of my initial thoughts was feeling sorrow for the fellow and presumably his family when he didn't come home. The way that glaciers form is ideal in terms of preserving both the chronology and in fact preserving things in the ice. It's always laid down in layers with fresh snowfall. If you put anything on the surface, it's going to get buried in the snow and it's going to be kept at a cold temperature. So it's just great for preserving artifacts and or other organic tissue.
The body and artifacts were carefully tagged, wrapped, and transported to the Royal British Columbia Museum in Victoria. The discovery was made on the traditional lands of the Champagne and Asiac First Nation. They have named him Quadedansinchi, meaning long ago person found. Stories of traveling across glaciers are common in their oral history, and Quadedansinchi brings them to life. To science, the remarkable paradox of the discovery is that the glacier may never have given up its treasure if it had not been melting, back to the level it was 600 years ago. Now the body is once again frozen in time, safely stored in a freezer. Glaciers are melting. And as they shrink, more questions will be asked, more mysteries revealed. The 1990s have been the hottest decade in 1,000 years. 1998 was the hottest year. 1997 came in second.
More snow that will fall at the Columbia Icefields during the winter that can melt during the summer. It is not rare to have about...
Places in the Canadian Arctic have warmed 5.4 degrees this century. The poles will grow hotter, faster than the equator. Over the last 2 decades, the global temperature curve is the only curve steeper than the rise in the stock market. In 20 years, the Northwest Passage, the fabled route through Canada's Arctic ice, may crack wide open for the first time in millennia. Looking deep into the heart of a glacier speaks volumes about our own activities and their effects on the planet. They provide the clearest picture of the planet's past. And driving roughshod over it today is an omen for the future. As a frozen time capsule, ice is a silent oracle that speaks subtly about the Earth's natural history. Can the portraits glaciers describe of our past and present guide our passage into the future? Ice ages have been a part of the Earth's natural evolution for millions of years. Today, perhaps the real mystery is, will the planet ever experience another one?